Hello there, are variables hoisted in JavaScript or not? First of all, we need to understand what hoisting means. Most people believe that hoisting means variable declarations are moved to the top of the scope. I don't think that's correct, and I'm going to show you why, starting with this first example. This example is just to show you what not to do rather than what to do, and demonstrates how easy it is to do something silly in JavaScript when you're declaring variable names. Like this dodgy variable, it's declared within a function. We're not using the var let or const keyword, and yet it becomes a global variable from nowhere, it seems. The first console log that runs within the program is this line, and that displays the value of bad being 5 just here at the top. The function is then called, and the second console log runs, and we get dodgy equals 15. Technically, you're not declaring the variable unless you use var let or const, so dodgy is not being declared. That dodgy name variable has now become global. It's not enclosed within the badass function scope because we can access it down here. As you can see, dodgy is being updated to 20 just there, and it's also being sent to the console log. We can create global variables then by forgetting to use either var, let or const, and that is proper dodgy. But now we need to understand what we're doing with the rest of this example. We've got the var bad declared variable, and at first glance it might look like we're doing something similar to what we're doing with dodgy, because we've got bad equals 10 just like we've got dodgy equals 15. We're not though, because bad is just a global variable, and within the badass function bad is simply updating the value of that global variable. Now if we comment this line just here and click save, we get an undefined, we get a not defined error, because at this line here, at line 40, console log can no longer see the global variable because we've just commented it out of existence, and it can't see within inside the function. Don't forget, once we've called the function, the badass variable is going to be created as a global variable. So if I just comment this line to get rid of the error and click save again, that's okay now, because just like with dodgy, bad is a global variable which is created at the point that we invoke or call the function just on this line, and console log on the next line displays the value of bad as set within the function. So bad is now a value of 10. And so that now brings us on to the second example. I'll just click save. Now we've got a naughty function and a fitting variable name to go with it. We have got spank equals 2 declared with the var keyword, and we are calling the function just here. Var declared variables are initialized immediately to undefined. I'm still maintaining at this point that variable names are not hoisted to the top of the scope within which they are declared. Let's just have a look and see why this looks as though it's being hoisted. When we get the value undefined rather than getting an error, it is because the variable spank is recognized by the JavaScript engine as existing, and therefore when we display the value with the first call to console log, we get the value undefined. That's what would happen if we move this line, the declaration. Let's remove it from there and put that at the beginning of the function and click save again. Var spank being at the top, you would expect to give us undefined because we've declared the variable but we've not assigned the value, so that makes sense, which brings us to example 3. This is just another example of why it seems as if the variable names are being hoisted to the top of the scope within which they are being declared. It seems as if naughty var is being moved up to the top of global scope. Otherwise, how is it that we can refer to naughty var within the function which is declared above where we're declaring naughty var? Same kind of thing as example 2. We can see that when we call the function on this line, we've got a value of undefined, and that is what you would expect to see if var naughty var, I'll just move that up to the top, was moved to the top of the script, and we click save, we get no change. If we now comment this line and click save, naturally we get an error. I'll just undo that. That brings us to the next example, example 4. This is where the true understanding really comes into play. We need to consider what is meant by the execution context. The execution context is made up of two phases, the creation phase and the execution phase. As I've stated here, memory is allocated for let and const during the creation phase, just as it is with the var keyword. By doing that before running the execution phase, JavaScript already knows about the existence of the variables because they've been registered in memory. During the execution phase, that is when values get assigned to the variable names. So we can get undefined in the way of an error, meaning that the variable does not exist or is not recognized to exist, or we can get undefined as a value for the variable name. More to the point though is how can we prove that let and const are both being effectively hoisted, so it seems as if the variable names are being moved to the top of the scope, but as we've said, they're not actually really being moved to the top of the scope, it just seems that way. We can do that by looking at the errors that we get if we do certain things. We can't access the skipped variable by uncommenting this line because we get an access error. Now, when you think about it, what kind of an error would you expect to see if the JavaScript engine, which is the browser, knows nothing about the existence of the variable? It's not going to be an initialization error. Let's undo that and click save. And let's comment this line and click save. And now we can see that the first console log is giving us the value 25, which is because within global scope, we've got let skipped, and therefore we're accessing that version. If we now comment that version, what will we get? We get the not defined error. Wow. The immediate scope within the if block has been commented just here, and also within global scope. So as the JavaScript engine bubbles up through the scopes to try and find a declared version of the variable, it can't find one, and so we get the not defined error. As I put here in the notes, skipped being dead here is applicable during the execution phase after the creation phase has completed. So all of this code, up until we see the let skipped line of code just here, all of that code is the dead zone. We can do exactly the same test with variables which are declared with the const keyword. I'll just undo all what we've just done and click save. Back to where we were at the beginning. For example, if I uncomment this line and click save, we can see that the variable is being reported as not defined because there is no declaration with either var, let or const of the variable name stubborn. But if I also uncomment this line, now there is a declaration, we get an access error just like we did before, which finally brings us to the next example, example 5. This example is pretty much the same as the var example 3 in that we are referring to a variable name before it is being declared. We declare it just here and we are referring to it in the function. The only difference is that var declared variable names, as we've already seen, can be accessed before the declaration, whereas let declared variable names can't. So if I just uncomment this and click save, we can see we've got an access before initialization error. We can now quickly change that to var just to prove that there's a difference and click save and we're okay. We just get undefined twice, which brings us to example 6. This is a function declaration, which are also known as function definitions in JavaScript, being called before it's being declared. It's being declared just here and we are calling it on the line above. The only difference between what we can see happening here and in the previous examples where the variables were initialized to the value of undefined is that when we now call sneaky func, effectively the whole of the function has been hoisted to the top of the scope, whereas with the variables only the variable name is moved to the top of the scope, which kind of makes functions more hoisted than variables, which now brings us to the last example, example 7. Unlike declared functions, function expressions cannot be called before being created. If we simply call sadfunc without declaring it, like we are doing just here, and like we are doing just here, then not surprisingly, we get the sadfunc is not defined error. If we uncomment this line and click save, we get sadfunc is not a function. The reason that happens is because we're declaring the variable, we're not assigning a value. If we get rid of these parentheses and click save, we now no longer get the error because we're not attempting to call the function before the function is being defined. It's reverting back to this function call at the bottom. If we now uncomment this line instead and click save, we get the cannot access before initialization error that we've seen in the previous examples, which is simply because we're declaring it after the function call. And once again, we are getting the is not a function error. Let's just undo all of that. As per the console notes, we can see that the sadfunc variable name, which is this one just here, declared with let is being hoisted. We can see that the sadfunc variable name declared with var is being hoisted, but the function definition is not hoisted. The other interesting thing, as we can see in the console window, is we've got the whole function being displayed as the value for the variable name. And that brings us to the end of this tutorial. Another one's going to be out in about a week or so. Don't forget to subscribe. Hopefully you'll see me next time. Cheers.